Today we are looking at chapter 16, but to get to chapter 16 we need to do a little bit of a recap going back a bit. So we're working our way through the Bible, we're working our way through Genesis, and we're in the story of Abraham and Sarai. And the story takes a twist this week, as stories do. We've got to go back a bit, and originally God came to Abram and made him a promise. I'm going to make you a great nation. You're going to have as many descendants as stars in the sky. And you're going to have your own land, and you're going to be a blessing to everyone, and God's going to bless you. But as the story goes on, this is now 10 years later. 10 years, nothing's happened. It's been 10 years. He started off when he got this promise, he was 75, now he's 85. His wife Sarah was 65, now she's 75. And they were expecting to have children. I mean, up to this point, up to the promise, they couldn't have kids. That was pretty obvious. But God's come along and said, I'm going to make you a great nation. Obviously, to be a great nation, you need children. And so it still hasn't happened. And so we looked last week, what we were looking at last week was, God comes to Abram, they have a conversation, and he says, look, I'm going to make you a great nation. And Abram comes up with a great idea. He says, God, I'm going to help you out. How about, I haven't had any children, it's been 10 years, looks like it's not going to happen. How about my servant Eliezer? How about he is going to be the guy that is going to take my inheritance and be the great person? So even back in 15, we see that Abram is trying to help God out. We told last week that God looked at Abram and said, because of your faith, I count this as righteousness. So at the heart, Abram believes what God has said, but there's obviously still part of him that's going, it's like, I believe what you're saying, but really? Like, do I need to help you? And sometimes we do this. Someone will come to us and they promise a whole bunch of things and we believe them. And then when we see they're not going to deliver, we go, oh, that's okay. You know, you've done enough, that's okay. I'll take it over from here. That's sort of what he's doing. But God says very clear to him, this man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. That's what he says to him. It's very clear. Not Eliezer. It's actually going to be from you, biologically from you. So, before we get to the passage, let me ask you my question this morning. Do you trust God for your future? Now, there are some of you perhaps, or maybe some watching online, that go, no, not really. Look, I'm a very self-sufficient person. If you want a job done properly, you've got to do it yourself. I take care of myself, that's how I work. But I think most of you would say yes. Yes, you trust God for your future. But then I asked the question a little bit more in detail. Do you trust God theoretically or completely? It's a difference between your head and your heart. You might have the head knowledge or the head idea. Yeah, I trust God. Do you trust God? Yeah, absolutely, I trust God. Well, has it made it to your heart? Do you trust God completely? And what that means is, despite what you see and what's happening, you're going to trust God. Because it's very easy to trust God theoretically, but to trust God completely and actually is a much harder thing to do. So let's have a look at this passage. Starts off in verse 1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, has borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. Where did this Egyptian slave come from? Egypt. See, I spoke a couple of weeks ago about the ripple effect of poor decisions that people make. They got almost certainly Hagar, they picked her up in Egypt. When they went to Egypt, when Abram didn't trust God, there was a famine, they went down to Egypt, and remember that appalling story where he says of his wife, no, she's not my wife, she's my sister. And we've covered that, we've been through that. And Pharaoh gave Abram a lot of stuff on account of he thought it was his sister. But either way, when he left, God looked after him. When they left Egypt, God still blessed them with everything, and no doubt they picked up some servants. And I use the word servant because actually, if you look at the original text, the word slave is actually a very poor translation of this word. And, you know, when you flip between different translations, you get different words. I tend to stick to the NIV just because it's the version that I and probably most of us know best. But the word actually would be much better translated as maidservant or female servant. Because it's not a slave as in a slave. It's more like it's designated a woman who is part, and it's only a woman, this particular title, is part of a family unit, but under the authority of the mistress of the house. So they do all the chores, the cooking, the cleaning, all that sort of stuff. Perhaps almost like a nanny that rich people have, and they have a nanny who looks after everything. They raise their children, they do everything. So that's more of the context that it's in, rather than slave. Verse 2, the Lord has kept me from having children. Notice how straight up Sarai says, it's the Lord that has kept me from having children. Now, back in those times, there was no understanding of biology. There was no understanding that perhaps he isn't able to have children or she isn't able to have children just because their body doesn't do what it was supposed to do. There was no understanding of that. The understanding was that if you couldn't have children, this is solely and completely because God has not let you. And the reason God has not let you is because you've done something wrong and you're cursed. This is exactly how they thought back then. So, if you didn't have children, that was a sign to everybody that you'd been cursed by God. It was a terrible burden for somebody to have. You have the burden of not having children, and anyone who has been through that knows how difficult that is, or you've walked with someone who can't have children. It's a deep burden. But on top of that, you have the image in the community that you're cursed and you're a bad person, and you've obviously done something wrong. Additionally, Abram, the name Abram means exalted father. He has no children. Hello, exalted father. How are you today? How are your children? Don't have any children. It's not a good name for a man who has no children. So there is much shame surrounding this story, which is part of the reason what happens. So because of this, Sarai is going to help God out. Just like Abram tried to help God out and said, well, just use Eliezer as the heir. Now Sarai goes, I'm going to help God out. So she says, she comes up with a great idea. Verse 2, go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Well, this is a type of surrogacy. And this happens today. People have surrogacies today. Someone has a child through somebody else. This is a thing that happens today. Sometimes it's done legally, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's done through coercion. This is coercion. The idea was that if Hagar, who is a maidservant in the family, can have a baby, Sarai can take that baby. She can adopt that baby in the same way that people adopt children now, and she's no longer childless. Her shame is taken away. The fact that she didn't give birth to that child is irrelevant. When you adopt a child, it's your child. And that's exactly what she was thinking. So, how does Abram respond? Abram agreed with Sarah. Verse 2, Abram agreed to what Sarah said. What? Abram, the man of God. Yeah, okay, Sarah, that seems like a good idea. You know, when I read this story, it's like, I'm not going to ask you to put your hand up, but there are some men in here that will shout at the television. They will shout at the television, whether it be the news or the football game. Why did he do that? Why did he pass it? Or in a story. Do you ever watch a movie and you just go, no, don't do that? Like, I remember watching Jurassic Park, the original Jurassic Park in 1993. I didn't enjoy that movie. I mean, it's not my style of movie anyway, But I had to Google this because I wanted to find out what the guy's name was. If you know this movie, there's a guy in there by the name of Dennis Nedry. Dennis Nedry was the computer programmer, and he's the guy that mucked it all up. And I still remember the emotion of watching that movie going, no, don't press that button. Don't turn that off. Can't you see what's going to happen? And I genuinely did not enjoy that movie because I was so annoyed by this person making bad decisions. And you look at this story and you go, Abram, no, what are you doing? This is a terrible idea, and I feel this frustration. What he should have said was, Sarai, I understand what you want to do, but God's made us a promise. He's made us a promise, and we need to trust in God. But he didn't do it. Well, here's 5 reasons, potentially, why he agreed to this. The first is, happy wife, happy life. You know what? I asked AI, I said, happy wife, happy life, happy husband, finish the sentence. It can't finish it. It couldn't finish it. There is no word that rhymes with husband that makes any sense whatsoever. The best it could come up with was happy spouse, happy house, which is kind of watering it down. Now, man, there is something in this. Happy wife, happy life. There has never been a statement, happy husband, whatever follows that. And for many men, this is our Achilles heel, isn't it? Because often a husband, a man, can only feel as happy as his wife is. This is a real Achilles heel for us. It's a hard thing. I have a friend I look up to very much. He says when his wife gets angry at him, he says for 2 hours, he just shuts down. And I said, why do you do that? He says, I don't know. I don't know why I do that. I says, is it because you think she's going to leave you? And he says, I think it is. They've been married for 40 years. I mean, it's a good marriage, but there is something in men that struggles with this. Anyway, the second reason, without saying too much, the obvious. Would you like to go and be with our younger, good-looking maidservant? That's all I say to that. 3, to take away Sarai's shame. Like Abram saw the pain that Sarai had. Okay, this is a terrible idea, but at least it might make her happy. At least I don't have to put up with this sadness that I have of this woman who can't have a child. Maybe he did it to take her shame away, or even his own shame for that matter. Remember, Abram is the exalted father. He didn't have any children. This was a way they could get children. But ultimately, I think the reason is because he didn't trust God. Even though he had faith in God, there's still this element that he has, getting back to that question, do you trust God theoretically or completely? And it seems like he trusted God theoretically, but not completely. Well, it goes on, verse 3. Sarai took Hagar and gave her to Abram to be his wife. Now, this word wife is a very interesting word here, because the word wife sort of legitimizes this relationship, and many people back then had multiple wives. If she became Abram's wife, she is part of the family, so this whole idea of surrogacy becomes legitimate. Hence the word wife. However, that is not how God saw this. Because we go on to verse 8, we'll come to, it says, when God talks to Hagar, he says, Hagar, slave of Sarai, or maidservant of Sarai. In God's eyes, she is not his wife. This is not a legitimate marriage. Even though they tried to make it look like that and help God out and say we can do this, that's actually not what happened. Verse 4, he slept with Hagar and she conceived. Okay, well, now, supposedly, this is what Sarai wanted, and now what's happened? Has it fixed the problem? No. It has made an already bad situation worse, which is so often the case when we take matters into our own hands and stop trusting in God. It goes on, verse 4. When she, Hagar, knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. See, the moment that Hagar got pregnant, a few things happened. First is, Sarai knows for certain that she was the problem. It was her why she wasn't having any children. Because obviously now Hagar's got pregnant. It wasn't Abram. So now, in her mind, perhaps, she really thinks that she's more cursed. And this maidservant, this Egyptian maidservant, has just had a child. Remember, if you have a child, you're blessed. If you don't have a child, you're cursed. And I think to a certain extent, I can imagine that there was this idea coming from Hagar towards Sarai, the sort of, nah. You know that silly thing that kids did at school? You know, yeah, I've got a child. Where's your child? So, oh, you don't have a child. Oh, well, that's terrible, isn't it? I've got a child. Do you know where my child came from? Your husband. And we don't know any of this banter that went on. But whatever it is, Hagar is essentially criticizing or having a go at Sarai. It's a terrible situation. It was never going to end well. So how does Sarai respond to this? Well, I'm going to quote to you, let's see how many playwrights and people we know in here. I'm going to quote to you a phrase from the 1697 play called The Mourning Bride. Does anyone know what I'm going to... Not mourning as in not the morning, like it's morning time. Mourning as in a woman in mourning, M-O-U-R-I-N-G. I only know this because I Googled it. I don't know these things. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. That's where that came from. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Sarai is now scorned. So, what is her reply? Then Sarai said to Abraham, you are responsible for the wrong I'm suffering. You. Pretty sure it was her idea. You are responsible for the wrong I'm suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she's pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. This is unbelievable. Like, I just read this. I mean, Sarai gets a mention in Hebrews 11 as one of the great women of faith. I think the benchmark is low, and we should be encouraged by this. Look how she responds. She had an idea. Her husband went along with it foolishly. And now she's blaming him. Women, you would never do this to your husband, I know. But that's what she did. It's a terrible thing. It was never going to end well. But sadly, in this story, it just keeps getting worse. Then how does Abram respond? Your slave is in your hands. Do with her and my unborn child whatever you think best. Abram caves again. This is his second chance to stand up and be a man, and he caves again. What he should have said was, no, we've made a mistake, and this is the consequences of our actions. Hagar is pregnant with my child. Understand, it's not your child, but it's my child. And Sarai, this is what you wanted, and this is the consequences of our actions. We're just going to have to ride with it. But he doesn't. He caves again. Now again, we get back to this tension between men and women. Now, Lisa says to me, and I'm not going to say this very well because I don't speak womanese, but if she says to me basically, I want you to give in to everything I ask you, but not really. I really want you to say no and be the man of the house and stand up so I can respect you. So there's this tension and conflict between these two things. It's a hard thing to understand, but it is there nonetheless. So Abram again misses his opportunity to stand up and be the godly man leader of the house. The God has called each of us men. If we say we are Jesus followers, that is our job. It's not easy, I know. The easiest thing is just to lie down and say, okay, dear, well, you just have whatever you want. But as we see in this story, sometimes it just creates problems. Verse 6, then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. Well, again, it ended up as a disaster. Now, the rest of this chapter goes on, and it tells a story about Hagar going off into the desert. So I'll quickly read it. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert, and he said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress. She answered. Then he told her, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her." The angel added, "I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count." The angel of the Lord said to her, "You are now pregnant, and you'll give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He'll be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him, and he will live in hostility towards all his brothers." So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son he had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. So just a couple of observations about this, because it is only just a tangential part of the story. Verse 10, "I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count." It is widely agreed that Ishmael is the father of perhaps not all, but most of the Arab tribes that we know today. Now, when we look at a map of today, we look at a map of the Middle East, all of this yellow is all Arab tribes and Arab peoples. Verse 10 was, "I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count." Did this happen? Yes. You know, God even kept his word to Hagar, the Egyptian maidservant. He said, "I will increase your descendants too numerous to count." Now that's just how many. There's millions of people living there. All of these nations around Israel, which is in the blue, all of these probably are people that are descended from Ishmael. Now the second thing he says to her is, "He will be a wild donkey of a man." Isn't that just what every woman wants to hear when they're going to have a child? Not like he's going to be a kind, loving child. He's going to follow me. He's going to grow up to be a pastor and love people. No, he's going to be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility towards all of his brothers. Just music for a mother's ear. Did this happen? Yes. This did happen. There's a long history of warring within the Arabs. Most of these countries have had civil wars for years, all warring against each other. Not to mention, of course, the constant fighting that goes on between all of these nations. Remember a few weeks ago, we spoke about the original promise that God gave to Abram was, "I will make you a nation." And it's a miracle that that place even exists, because all of these Arab countries around the Jews, their goal is to wipe them off the map. There's this constant animosity and anger towards. And that's exactly what happened. The wild donkey of a man, his hand will be against everybody and everybody's hand against him. So that happened too. Well, when Abram tried to accomplish God's promise by his own means, he created a mess. That mess continues to this day, some 4,000 years later. Again, these are these ripples that go out when we do something. It can go for generations, and it just keeps going. So this chapter that we've just looked at isn't primarily about Ishmael or even Hagar, even though they feature highly in this story. It's about what happens when God's people try to achieve God's promises by human effort instead of trusting in him. So I started with this question: do you trust God for the future? And if you say yes, is that theoretically or is it completely? So what do you need to trust God for? What do you need to trust God for today? Now, my guess is that if you think about things, there's no doubt a whole bunch of things that come to mind that you're concerned about. Now, these may not potentially have been promises that God's made to you, unless they are biblical promises. But, obviously these are promises that God made to Abram in person, whatever that looked like. But what is it that you need to trust God completely in right now? In the sale of our house and the moving, that's been a frustrating process for us because it's been so long-winded and we didn't expect to be travelling. And at times we were very deflated. And when we originally thought we sold the house and it all fell through, we were very deflated. And we just had to keep coming back and going, no, we just need to trust God in this. If we believe that God has called us to this, which we do, then God will provide. Doesn't matter how much I try and make this happen, I can't. In my own human strength, I can't. So what is it that right now that you need to trust God completely in for? And what is it that you were tired of waiting for? Could be salvation of your children. Understand that. Keep trusting God. And I think Jesus sums this up well when he says this. But seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Now that's a sermon within itself. But seek first the kingdom and his righteousness. That's our goal. Seek first the kingdom. All this other stuff, don't worry about it. You know, Sarah and Abram didn't trust God to provide in his timing, so they created their own solution. It was obviously a disaster. Jesus teaches that worrying leads us to take matters in our own hands, whereas faith rests in the Father's care. This is our challenge today. Trust God completely. We need to move from this idea of, yes, I trust God completely, theoretically, in our heads. We need to get it to our hearts, that we trust God completely, despite what we think we might be seeing with our own eyes. Let me pray.